I just want to again say good evening to everyone and to introduce myself. I'm Erica Piola. I'm the director of the Visual Culture Program, and it is truly my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's lecture. Before I introduce our captivating speaker for the evening, Rebecca Kamen, I wanted to quickly make some housekeeping remarks and introduce the Visual Culture Program to those unfamiliar with it. In terms of housekeeping, if you are new to a Zoom webinar, or as a reminder, you are muted and will only see the speakers during the program. To ask a question during and after the presentation, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll begin to answer questions following the presentation, which will last about 30 to 40 minutes. The sponsor of tonight's lecture, the Visual Culture Program, was born from the strength of the subject within the library's collections that focus on American cultural history from the 17th through early 20th centuries. Its mission is to promote visual literacy through the creative use of historical visual materials, as well as to foster our understanding of the social construction of our visual field and the visual construction of our social world. Tonight, with our speaker, artist Rebecca Kamen, we explore the visual reconstruction of our scientific world to humanize science. What can be made visible when we look closely from afar and differently at scientific phenomena through the lens of art and with the eye of the curious? It is my privilege to introduce Rebecca, who is here to speak about making the invisible visible, reimagining scientific discovery. Rebecca is a sculptor and lecturer who studies the intersections of art and science. Her internationally exhibited artwork seeks the truth through observation and is informed by wide-ranging research of cosmology, history, and philosophy. Her pieces connect common theoretical threads between various scientific fields to capture and reimagine what scientists see. A recipient of a Paula Krasner Foundation Fellowship, 2 Strauss Fellowships, and a Salzburg Global Seminar Fellowship, she has studied at the Library Company, American Philosophical Society, Harvard University, and the Cajal Institute in Madrid, as well as has served as an artist in residence at the National Institute of Health. Rebecca is currently the artist in residence in the Computational Neuroscience Initiative and Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Pennsylvania. Her talk tonight is influenced by her recent research as a University of Pennsylvania artist in residence, a personal non-COVID medical crisis during the pandemic, as well as her current exhibition at American University in Washington, D.C., Reveal, the Act of Reimagining Social Discovery. And that exhibition is on display through December 12th of this year. And I now want to give over the virtual floor to Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump right into my PowerPoint. Okay, first of all, I really want to thank the Library Company and Erica for just this very exciting opportunity to share my work. My work is research that turns into art, and it's just really been such an incredible opportunity working at the University of Pennsylvania with scientists. For this particular exhibition, I've also been collaborating with scientists at American University, the host of this exhibition, as well as microscopists at National Institutes of Health. And that's just been a very awe-inspiring experience working with all these people. I wanted to start this lecture off with the word apocalypse, because I know for many of us, the last year and a half has felt like an apocalypse, the pandemic, and also this wonderful historic image, which brings a whole new meaning to wearing a mask. These were actually masks that physicians wore for the last major plague. And what really struck me about the word apocalypse is that its meaning means a prophetic revelation, uncovering, disclosing, revealing. And when you take that point of view, all of a sudden you start seeing a glass not as half empty, but half full. And that really was the motivation and the tack that I took in terms of some of the work in this exhibition, which deals specifically with the coronavirus. my journey actually, and my interest in the intersections of art and science started growing up in Philadelphia, in places like the Franklin Institute. And these are two of my iconic objects that really planted so many seeds: the heart, which is still there, as well as the planetarium. And for a lot of people who are too young, this is what the planetarium actually looked like before it went digital. These are some of my early tools of discovery. My first microscope, my personal favorite, the chemistry set, which would be totally illegal in this day and age because of the types of chemicals that were in that box when you opened it, and a telescope that my dad and I built when probably I was probably 12 years old. And we went to Edmunds Scientific Company across the river in New Jersey. And I really thought I could see the heavens. Really, I could barely just see across the street, but it planted the seeds of possibility. This is a quote that's in the exhibition at AU. And I love this quote because it talks about that science is about proving, but intuition is where we discover. And it doesn't matter whether you're an artist or a scientist or anyone. Intuition is always about discovery. And we see this is true even with Mendeleev, who is the father of the periodic table. And he actually dreamt about the table in a dream. And when he woke up the next morning, he wrote down what he saw in his dreams. And this was really the start or the spark for the periodic table. That particular spark sparked a project I wanted to do, where I wanted to also reimagine the periodic table. And so my particular project worked with interpreting or reinterpreting the orbital patterns of the first 83 elements. And what I wanted to do was to move away from that rigid gridded chart, and I wanted to make an environment that was based on a Fibonacci spiral, because everything in nature is based on the Fibonacci spiral. And so this is a walking meditation. And so each one of these sculptures have been inspired by the electron orbital patterns of the first 83 elements in the table. Right after that period of time, I was invited to be an artist in residence at the American Philosophical Society Library. And because of my interest in physics, they wanted me to research the John Archibald Wheeler notebooks. Wheeler is very significant in that he was a colleague of Einstein's. He also taught at Princeton. He never won a Nobel Prize, but he impacted so many people who actually did win the Nobel Prize. Also, during the same time I was working on my research there, they were deassessing their card catalog. So what I did, and actually Wheeler is the first person to come up with the word black hole. So that's attributed to something that he developed. So what you're seeing here is a sculpture that is actually in the reading room right now, inspired by a black hole, and it's actually ingesting the black hole and the John Wheeler cards in it. So it's actually a little bit humorous, but it also is just an extraordinary, it was such an extraordinary opportunity to really research with these notebooks, and I continue to do it today. From Wheeler's work with black holes, for the 100th anniversary of the discovery of general relativity, I decided to take on relativity and black holes. And my research took me to Harvard Center for Astrophysics, to MIT, to RIT, to people studying gravitational calculations. And this is an installation that I created inspired by black holes. What you're seeing here, these cone shapes, symbolize the very frenetic orbital patterns of two binary black holes. And this piece, this conical piece, is actually cut hand cut, flat, and when it's suspended through gravity, it creates a cone. And then the element on the floor creates a feeling of a ripple, having to do with the ripple of space-time. In the center are actual fossils. And the whole notion is that this piece creates a dialogue between space-time and geological time. Now we're going to fast forward to current research that I'm doing in the Complex Systems Lab at the University of Pennsylvania. And they have been studying what goes on in the brain that makes us curious. And since I'm dealing with the library company, I wanted to show some scientific special collections, which are things that are very near and dear to me. And it's very interesting, even since, you know, we started researching, people have been curious. And you can see this in this wonderful image of Descartes from the 1600s and also Robert Fludd. And it's so interesting to me, even before we had very high powered equipment that really enabled us to see and know more than we could ever imagine, these philosophers, these natural philosophers, use their own curiosity to try to figure out how we know. The study I was involved with at Penn is called the KNOT study, or Knowledge Networks Over Time. And their study, what they were doing was to see how people are curious. And what they use is Wikipedia. And so the whole idea is that when you're looking at Wikipedia, some people just, you know, hit one button. Other people, like me, hit, excuse me, every button link to try to understand more information. What was interesting when I was working with these scientists was I was curious because they were really not addressing visual learners like myself. And so they offered to work with me to try to chart my path of curiosity, which is something that I'll be sharing with you in a few minutes. And so the work for this exhibition was work that was created over the last 2 years. It was created during the pandemic, and it was so incredible to me how things like the pandemic really had a profound impact on the development of the work. This is actually the cover of the catalog, and you can find this catalog online as well for the work in the exhibition. The curator, Sarah Tongi, and I decided that since I collect curious objects, that might be a wonderful introduction for people to the exhibition. So when you come into the exhibition at AU, we've created what are called a Kunstkammer in German, or cabinet of curiosities. And what you're seeing here are specific objects that are in my personal collection, objects that I work with on a daily basis that I've collected that really speak to me and inspire my work. These are two examples of these objects. The one on the left, the larger model, is called Kepler's Obsession. Kepler really believed that by creating this model of nesting polyhedras, that it would represent the distances between the planets. The good news is he created an absolutely beautiful model. The bad news is it was incorrect. But we have this really incredible model that has really inspired me for many, many years. And this is juxtaposed to something I'm very excited about. This has been on a gift on loan from the National Institutes of Health. And this is a similar model to the one that Dr. Fauci just donated to the Smithsonian. So they lent us one of the models to be included in this exhibition. As you proceed through the exhibition, on the left, you see something that looks like a big fur ball. That actually is a data visualization of all the knowledge networking that went on in my brain that helped me manifest all the work in this exhibition. And it's breathtaking when you see it in person because it is so complex. And to the right of it, the blue screen is a monitor where you'll see this in real time. And this is an example of that. You can see the complexity. And it's not just me, we all have these complex pathways that happen that make us curious. In my case, for me, it was the catalyst for thinking about an exhibition. And one of the ways that the scientists were able to gain this knowledge about my knowledge networking was I do PowerPoints that help me see the different things that I'm researching. It works really well in lectures. And so what they did is it's the speech dynamics of me describing my artistic process that they were able to use to create a data visualization for this particular exhibition. Another component of this exhibition was a collaboration with scientists at American University and also at Penn. And so what you're seeing here, this is a woman who's a professor of neuroscience who researches the cerebellum. And I was very fortunate about 10 years ago. I was an artist in residence in the neuroscience program at National Institutes of Health. And I have no training in neuroscience, but just being a curious person, it was so exciting to be able to work with researchers. So anytime I have an opportunity to work with neuroscientists, I'm always signing myself up. But what's interesting about this sculpture, the cerebellum is like a miniature brain. It has two hemispheres, which I've tried to capture in the sculpture. It also is the part of the brain that has the most diversity of neurons. So I tried to capture that in this particular sculpture. Another scientist that I work with was a scientist that works with quantum physics. And this particular piece refers to the title of his research, which he refers to as quantum quilts. And I love the idea that sometimes a scientist will use language that enables us to understand and imagine or reimagine what that research is about. And so this particular sculpture was something that I gleaned from my dialogues with Nate. This is an installation view, a long view of the exhibition. You can see on the right side some of the sculptures that I was just showing, and I will be talking about some of the other additional sculptures coming up. I had a really extraordinary opportunity at the beginning of my research at AU. I was actually invited to be an artist in residence there for a week, and on the second day, the day I was supposed to do a big physics colloquium, I woke up with the worst case of vertigo to the point where I had to be rushed to Georgetown Hospital, only to find out that I had a brain tumor on my optic nerve. It was just breathtaking news. And so unfortunately I had to cancel meeting with some of these scientists, but what happened was the experience of having brain surgery and then a residual of that brain surgery about a month or two later was terrible double vision. So the curious person in me thought, wow, I should try to get into my studio and I should try to paint what I'm experiencing. So what you're seeing here is the first painting. It's a series of paintings called Reverie. And this is my understanding of vertigo, or what I was experiencing in my vertigo state. Here's another painting that developed. So every single day I would go into my studio with severe double vision and I would start painting. And I probably created about 40 paintings, which are part of this exhibition, because truly crisis can be extraordinary opportunities. And it certainly was the case with this body of work. So right after the brain surgery, about 2 or 3 months later, the coronavirus hit. So it seemed like a double whammy. And what was interesting to me, the one scientist I got to meet with before I was rushed to the hospital was a heliophysicist, someone that studies the dynamics of the sun, which you see in this left-hand image. And all of a sudden that word corona started to come into my consciousness, and I was starting to wonder, wow, what is the relationship between corona at the macro, the sun, and then the micro? And so it took me on the most incredible journey of discovery, which also starts with scientific special collections. And I have always been very interested in solar research. And you see this beautiful Kircher drawing on the left, this engraving, which to me is just spectacular. And then Angelo Secchi, who was an astronomer at the Vatican, he did these beautiful studies of solar flares. And so that started to inspire thinking about the sun's corona. And then this image, this was Savina Godoni from AU. This is a 21st century image of solar corona. And I have to tell you what a comfort it was to be able to, during a pandemic, to try to find what the meaning was for this experience for me personally. And it was my research. And so what I decided to do was to reach out to microscopists who were dealing with the coronavirus to try to understand its meaning for me personally. And so what I realized is that there was a dynamic of the corona solar emissions that was very similar to the spiking protein dynamic at the micro level in the coronavirus. And so one of the things I'm interested in is scientific special collections, not only books, but also scientific instruments. And this is just an absolutely beautiful microscope of Robert Hooke's. And I've included one of his early images because what's so fascinating to me about his image of the cork, he developed the word cells because when he looked at the cork under magnification, they look like monk's cells where monks sleep. And so the term cells that we use in science has been appropriated from his observation through this microscope. My colleagues at the Rocky Mountain Lab, this is their electron microscope, and you can see how different micro worlds are being revealed, the one on the left, and then these absolutely beautiful images of the coronavirus. Who would ever think something so lethal and deadly could look so absolutely beautiful? So this was certainly my muse, looking at these images. And my own personal feeling is when I felt like I was starting to do this research, the pandemic wasn't as terrifying to me because I felt like I was understanding what its meaning could be for me and how I could use my art to reproduce it. What you're seeing here is one of the Corona-inspired sculptures, and the curator was concerned because it's the first time she's ever had to curate an exhibition where she couldn't see the work in person. So if you look on the right, what she asked me to do was to use my iPhone video feature, which I've never done before, to shoot the sculpture so she could have an idea of what it looked like in real life, as opposed to just a flattened photographic image. So towards the end of the exhibition, what was really exciting for me is because I was looking at so many different scientific works, I was starting to make some observations. And the biggest observation was the fact that whether I was looking at the coronavirus, whether I was looking at quantum mechanics, or the image at the bottom right, which is a woman in Great Britain that studies the pathways, the geometric pathways in which the vaccine was being developed, all go back to an artist who's in the upper right-hand corner, which is M.C. Escher, who was one of the first people to really identify and work with what we call tessellation. And what's so significant about Escher is his research turned into artwork, but it also impacted mathematicians who were trying to understand structures like quantum mechanics, you know, how these things, the geometry of how these things work. So from there, I thought, wow, geometry has to be the significant key to a lot of the scientific research that I'm looking at, and especially viruses. And what was significant, my research revealed that the coronavirus is based on a sasahedron, one of the polyhedra forms. And my research, again, I started feeling like I was falling down the rabbit's hole. And what I realized, I found this wonderful quote of Plato, "Geometry draws the soul towards truth." And I was starting to feel that that was happening for me, that I was on this extraordinary journey of discovery, all because I was curious. And I came across in my research that the University Museum at the University of Pennsylvania has one of the earliest fragments, I guess would be the best term to describe this, of Euclid's geometry, which it's just amazing that it has survived all these years and just how beautiful it is. And then this book also in the library company's collection, Euclid's geometry. But what's so extraordinary about this book is Euclid decided, instead of just having flat drawings, why not do some type of pop-up? So people can really understand how things move from 2D to 3D. And if you've never seen this, it is worth a trip to the library to see it. It's just magnificent. And so this inspired the last series of work for this exhibition. And because it's been these were so revelatory for me, I called them illuminations. And so what you're seeing here is basically a painting that was painted flat. And I work with Mylar, which is a plastic substrate. I've been working with it for about 30 years. And these are just these very beautiful, powerful landscapes that are painted flat. And then the pieces are actually folded, scored, and bent. And then they go from flatlands into their geometry. And then the last piece, I would actually define it as more of a working meditation, is a sculpture installation. And as I showed earlier, for me, when I do a big exhibition like this, I like to do some type of major installation about a scientific phenomena. In this case, I wanted to take on the coronavirus. And during my research, I came across what's called an SIR model, which shows a component of the virus, how susceptible it is, who's infected, who's recovered. And so for my installation, what I decided to do was to have it reflect, trace, and symbolize the migratory pattern of the coronavirus. So what you see at the bottom is a friend of mine who's an architect who actually helped me to do the plotting for this particular installation. This is what it looks like installed in the gallery. There are 28 sculptures. I spent my whole pandemic, you know, some people say what they did on their summer vacation. I spent the whole pandemic working on this installation. And for me, it was a meditation in helping me work through my own feelings and my own reflection about this situation that I found myself in. I also, a lot of times, will collaborate with musicians. For this particular one, I reached out to Shodakai Talifaro because he's a beatboxer and he's a breath artist. So he uses his breath to create soundscapes. And so as you can see what the curator wrote, that what he's done is he's created a soundscape that reimagines the individual sculptures as a cycle of expanding and contracting breaths. And as you know, breathing was something, or is something, that's been impacted greatly by the coronavirus. I also work with another colleague and friend of mine, Steve Fowler, who's a poet in London. And what he did was to write an absolutely beautiful poem. So it was a poetic response to this installation. And now what I'd like to do is premiere a video that just got completed. You're the first people to actually see it and hear it. And what it will do is it will show you the sculpture installation. You will be able to hear the breath soundscape and Stephen's poem.
Thea, S-I-R, 28 spheres of Kamen's harmony, susceptible, inferred, immense, actual. The electron microscopy provides images of the virus long in memories. It shows gray spinning, transforming this. I point to the past 15 months into orbs. Here they are, grown enormous, before you in place, not within you in space. For what else can it become but the potential for indifferent attractiveness? A memory, this spread. Novel microscopy. The SIR diagram is a mirror that creates a migratory pattern in the mind, as one would imagine birds flying out of sight. Of birds, then. The diagram is a symbol that brings nets down, and what gets trapped in nets as it is expelled from our hands and rid by water is a thing that reflects, traces, and symbolizes both the virus and us. The universe participates in making the artist well and an instigator. The participation of the invisible moves the virus into view. A speck, a spread, a tiny writing in the air, a diagram, an avian metaphor, an object installed to illuminate, all of this completely noiseless. And this is why I write to you, in order to not speak the word and have it just be seen.
And here, as I get ready to conclude this part of the presentation, a beautiful image of someone in the gallery. And this particular image really captured for me what this sculpture installation is about, is bringing your own breath to be part of this collective breath of the coronavirus. And I just want to end by saying I'd like to share some very exciting news. I've just been notified that I'm one of 20 women who have been selected for an international exhibition of work inspired by the coronavirus at an exhibition at UNESCO in Paris. And this is an exhibition called Creative Resilience, and it's art by women in science. So I'd like to just share my gratitude for this opportunity to be able to share my work with you this evening. Start sharing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was wonderful. I'm just going to remind folks, if they have questions, to start typing them into the Q&A. And as you know, giving you some time to get your thoughts together and to type away. I had some questions for you, Rebecca, if you would so indulge me.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting because you showed the video at the end, which you mentioned was a collaboration with the artist who did the soundscape, the videographer. It's also showing your work. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about a lot of your work is collaborative and how that affects your curiosity, or is it, or affected by your curious nature? If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. What I have found is when I work with other people, it enables me to understand what I'm researching in a very different way. So if I'm working with a dancer is interpreting, we're looking at the same thing, but a dancer is interpreting it kinesthetically with their body. Steve Fowler, the poet who did that beautiful reading, Steve and I have been working since 2015. I met him at that conference in Salzburg, and we're both very interested in the brain. And we seem very simpatico in terms of, even though he's in London and in the United States, it's our research and our curiosity that enable us to really collaborate and connect. And I find he can look at my work and I can learn something about how he interprets it, and vice versa with my sculpture. And with Sho, the beatboxer, I'd never worked with him before, but breathing and breath seemed like the perfect soundscape for that, because, breathing is something we all do. It enables us to exist, but a lot of times we're not cognizant that we're even breathing. But because of COVID and because it's really taxed the pulmonary system of the body, I think breath has become even more front and center for all of us as human beings. And the idea is, when you're listening to someone breathing, when you're looking at a piece of artwork, it makes you more aware of your own breath and what that's about for you.
Thank you so much. For whatever reason, that was reminding me of when the pandemic started. I remember watching, I think it was like MSNBC, and one of their reporters had recently come down with COVID, and she was just talking about how it was like the feeling of like hot tar, like was in her lungs, is the way that she described it. So you're talking about the act of breathing and how that has become sort of front and center, and us thinking about our physicality within the pandemic. I guess that's a little random, but I just that's made me think about that. But we do have a question for you in the Q&A, and it's have any of your works been used in research or teaching, like the glass flowers and marine animals now at the Harvard Museum of Natural History?
Well, actually, about 13 to 14 sculptures of mine are permanently installed at the Porter Research Neuroscience building up at National Institute of Health. And I get invited to do a lot of lecturing. I lecture actually a lot to scientists. So what's exciting to me is at one point I was doing research in neuroscience and also astrophysics up at Harvard. And so what was always a lot of fun is when I was talking to neuroscientists, I would bring in things I discover about astrophysics and vice versa. And those scientists were really fascinated because, you know, science can be very siloed. So scientists rarely have an opportunity to look at what they do from another perspective. And to me, as an artist, I get to do that. I get to look at all these different fields, and because of my curiosity, to make certain observations. I also find scientific special collections, like at the Library Company, at the American Philosophical Society, really rich repositories of seeing how people have used, have gathered information. And one of the things I want to mention, because I think this is really important, is before the advent of the camera, all scientists had to be artists because it's the only way they could capture their observations. And I was very fortunate to be in the archives of Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who's the father of modern neuroscience in Madrid. And what was fascinating for me, he has a beautiful archive of over 7,000 drawings, and they're just magnificent, all done by hand. And something happens when you look through a microscope and you're recording with your hand, your eye in your hand, as opposed to just taking a photograph. And I think a lot of scientists sometimes miss that magic of being able to process what they're observing and understanding because they don't get to draw or paint. So that's one of the observations I've made, just looking in scientific special collections at times before the advent of the camera. I think science has really changed greatly.
That makes me think, if any of the scientists that you've worked with who are not artists by nature, have you inspired them to take up art, like to take up painting or some other type of, drawing art, then taking up art?
Well, it's interesting because I remember the first lecture I did at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard, it was packed. I walked in there, I didn't know anyone there, and I walked in, it was in their observatory, and it was packed with scientists. And it was a little daunting, to say the least. But what I came to realize, because I went up back to Harvard many times to do research at the Center for Astrophysics, is when you give people an opportunity to acknowledge culture or art, they love it. I would have people coming up to me and talking to me about things that they do on their own or relatives or things that they enjoy that have nothing to do with their scientific research, but because I was an artist coming in and sharing my work, it became an invitation for them to share some of their feelings about it. And one of the things, artists and scientists have one goal for the most part, to tell nature's story at some level. And one of the things that we share in common is looking at patterns. Patterns really enable us to see all kinds of things, whether you're a scientist or an artist. And whether you're creating a beautiful algorithm or you're creating a beautiful sculpture, we're all looking at something critically, and we're trying to listen to what it's trying to communicate to us and then to tell its story through our work.
That makes me also think, which is like a question I was sort of jotting down, which I think you possibly have answered it, maybe could expand. Because some of the works that you were showing are data visualization imagery.
Correct.
So, do you consider those works of art?
Well, they provide information. as an artist, I see everything as a work of art, you know. They probably don't. For them, it's just pure information. And actually, I wanted to get a t-shirt made with that visualization that said, "This is my brain on curiosity," because it is. I mean, who ever thinks about what goes on in their brain to make them curious, you know? And if I can invite people just to take 1 minute to think about that, the next time you're in a curious act, I think hopefully you'll remember what we were talking about tonight and see how these things sort of connect. One of the things that they research is that there's different ways that people are curious. My way is the most extreme. I'm what they call the dancer. The dancer is someone that takes these extraordinary leaps of faith in all different fields and all kinds of directions to reimagine whatever they're looking at and trying to interpret. And I've always been that way. I'm actually dyslexic, so my brain is wired different than most people. I'm more a visual learner. I obviously I do research in scientific special collections, but I'm not the kind of person that sits down and reads for enjoyment. I'm more a visual person. And so a lot of times when I lecture to students, I try to get them to really embrace the way they learn. You know, there's no such thing as a learning challenge. To me, it's everyone gets to learn in their own unique way, and everyone gets to contribute, you know, their observations. My dyslexia has enabled me to see things that a lot of people can't, even scientists. And I feel very blessed to be able to look at things differently.
Yeah, that also brings up to my mind, because I think we've discussed in the past that you're dyslexic, but also, you know, with your recent medical crisis that caused you to have double vision. And I'm not sure, you know, if like your dyslexia kind of, you know, was a compound, if you thought of that as also a kind of renewed opportunity to think about how you look at things in your own artwork. It also got, so I'm asking you a couple different questions, I think. But your use of color in your artwork, I mean, you've done sculpture, you've been doing painting, you know, your collaborative work with the video, and soundscapes. And I was just curious about your, you know, as an artist, how you make those decisions of when you're going to use color, when you're going to use, you know, when, like in a sculpture, because your earlier sculptures that you showed earlier in your presentation, that for me, like, I'm going to say like they're black and white. And then, you know, the painting you were doing when you were having it was in color, and the works for your most recent exhibition, there are color works, and then there's, you know, works that are more stark, let's say. Can you just, you know, talk that process of how you make those decisions?
Right. Well, some of the earlier work that I taught color theory, so I don't want to get too theoretical about this, but color is very emotional. So sometimes when I want people to really focus more on the form, like the electron orbitals for the periodic table, I want, you know, color is very, it's very emotional. For the periodic table, and also for Portal, which is the black hole piece, I wanted it to be more reflective, in the same way that Silent Spread, the big sculpture installation now, it's gray. Because I wanted people to focus more on the form. When you see color, a lot of times, color can visually get in the way of seeing forms. The coronavirus, you know, part of, I think, my choice of color had to do with some of the microscopy images that I was seeing, because the people I'm dealing with at the Rocky Mountain lab, the microscopist shoots those images first, and they're gray. And then the visual arts people, who I've become very good friends with now at that lab, they colorize it because they feel the colorization enables you to see things a little bit clearer than when they're in gray, you know, black, white, and gray. And actually, it was an article that Dr. Collins had written, who's the director of NIH, showing, juxtaposing, you know, the actual image and then the colorization of it, that actually started me on this whole path of discovery. I reached out to these people and introduce myself. Quite auspiciously, they had been up at NIH in Maryland and saw my sculpture in the Neuroscience building. So they were very excited. I had reached out to them, and we have this wonderful ongoing dialogue still. I have to tell you, for all of us, the pandemic is a frightening experience. What I've learned is it has enabled us to have some time to reflect on ourselves. For me personally, it's enabled me to research something that I never ever in my wildest imaginations thought I'd have an opportunity to do. How many people think they're going to live through a pandemic? The profound thing to me about the pandemic personally is it, as a humanity and a civilization, we have all come together to solve this problem, or a lot of us have tried to come together to solve this problem. And there are very few things in my lifetime that have been that powerful and have connected us as a civilization as this pandemic.
Another question for you, it's have you created pieces, either mechanical or digital, which include motion? It would be interesting for the piece on space and time.
Well, actually, space and time is what I'm researching. I'm getting ready to research now with quantum mechanics. So thank you. That might be a whole new thing that I can be thinking of. That's why I love doing these kinds of talks, because sometimes I get a lot more out of them than sometimes I feel I can give to the audience. So thank you.
So I think I'm gonna end our talk, if you don't mind, asking you sort of one of those, I don't know how to say it, but do you have a favorite piece from your current exhibition, and why?
Oh, wow. I would say Silent Spread, which is the big installation, because it was a piece that I got to work on every single day. I had to create all those sculptures. And actually, Shotokai, the sound artist, was insistent that I photograph every single one. I said, Shotokai, they're all the same. They're the same pattern. He said, no, I want to create 28 micro compositions, one for each one, where I'm going to respond to each one individually. So I took my iPhone and I started photographing, and he was spot on. Each one had a slightly different nuance about it, which I would have never realized had he not challenged me to do that, or invite me, that's a better word, to photograph it. So in that regard, that became a morning meditation, or a meditation. I'd wake up every morning and I'd know I'm going in my studio. I have this objective of creating this installation with these sculptures. And I had no idea what it was going to look like, because I don't even have a 21-foot wall in my studio space where I could have laid them out. So it was always an act of faith, which even getting up in the morning is, or creating artwork. But then the other thing is, a lot of these sculptures that evolved from my dialogues with scientists, because it's so exciting to listen to someone who's passionate about what they do, but they're using a different language than what you're used to. And then what you have to do is listen to what they're telling you, and then look at their diagrams that they're so excited about, and then reimagine what they're talking about and what its meaning is for you. Because so much of my art practice is about humanizing science. I mean, most people who are non-scientists are terrified of science. Even though we're living, breathing science, the world around us is living, breathing science. So my whole practice is about humanizing it, making it as exciting as I find it, for people through my work, and make it more accessible for humanity.
having some problems with my mute button there, but I was gonna say that's, I think, a wonderful way to end our discussion tonight. And I just want to thank you again so much, Rebecca, for sharing your current work with us, and congratulations on UNESCO. And I mean, that's a wonderful honor and well-deserved. And so I wish you the best of luck with that as well. And I just want to let folks know that, this has been recorded, so we will be sending out a link to all the registrants with this recording, so you can relive this webinar again if you would like, or share it with others who could not make it tonight. But again, thank you, Rebecca. And I also want to thank Blanche Brown, who's our behind the scenes, who was helping out this evening and added all the lovely, the wonderful information at chat. So thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
Yep, it's Thursday, so I'm going to wish everyone a happy weekend, a happy Friday, and happy weekend as well. All right, thanks, everyone. Have a good
Be
evening.
well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.